Cadillac BLS. Design, performance, luxury.
After my first episode featuring rebadge cars that flopped, I got several suggestions that inspired me to find 10 more.
Hey look, stock photo business people carpooling in the new Scion IA.
Same as before, these are examples of partnerships between rival auto brands, where one fails to successfully repurpose and sell the other's car as their own. This is my old car.
It's weird they have a backup camera, until you realize they can't turn their heads.
While working on this list, I also came across some rebadge cars in which that rebadge proved to do far better in sales than the original car it was based on. Kind of a reverse flop, if you will. For example, the Pontiac Vibe was based on the Toyota Matrix, but at least in the US, the Pontiac sold far better. Let me know of others you think should be in this list, and if I get at least 10, I will consider them for a future episode. Number 10. Toyota Corolla, Chevy Nova. When most car people hear the name Chevy Nova, they either think back to the 1960s, when it was first known as a Chevy 2, and competed with the Chevelle and Malibu as an affordable compact muscle car. Or they remember the Nova of the 70s, that gradually became less powerful, and consequently less popular.
I remember you used to drive that crappy blue Chevy Nova. What are you driving now?
Same crappy blue Chevy Nova.
But many may not realize that when the Nova ended its run as a rear-wheel drive compact in 1979, Chevrolet would bring the name back in 1985 on a front-wheel drive subcompact that was designed and built by Toyota. This new Nova shared the same platform and many parts of one of Toyota's most popular cars, the Corolla. However, unlike most other Japanese cars sold by Detroit's Big Three that were imported, the Nova was built in California under a new partnership between GM and Toyota called New United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated, or NUMI for short, using an older GM plant in Fremont that had shut down due to poor management and quality issues. Many of the NUMI workers were sent to Japan to learn the Toyota way of manufacturing, which may have been the inspiration for the 1986 movie Gung Ho. Toyota also built Corollas for the North American market at the NUMI factory, but always sold far more Corollas than Novas.
Witness the birth of a bright new star, created through the joint effort of General Motors and Toyota, Nova.
Over 420,000 Toyota-designed Novas were sold during its 4-year run, a number that may not sound like a flop, but the Corolla sales were around 50% more each year, and the Nova sales decreased when it stayed on the same form even after the Corolla was upgraded in 1987. GM would later use the newer Corolla for its Geo Prism beginning in 1990, and the NUMI plant lasted until GM's bankruptcy in 2008, after which a little startup called Tesla took it over.
Go yourself.
Number 9. Ford Explorer, Mazda Navajo. Although most of the vehicles Mazda sells in North America today are SUVs, back in the 1980s, Mazda didn't sell any, and instead sold something they don't offer today, pickup trucks. Like other Japanese car makers, their trucks were compact, such as their B series that began in 1961. However, when Mazda started having financial troubles later in the 60s and early 70s, they turned to Ford for help and offered their B series pickup to be sold as a Ford Courier beginning in 1972.
It's a new Courier, imported by Ford.
When Ford started development of their Explorer SUV in the late 80s, Mazda helped in the development to get a version of their own. Although the Explorer offered both 3- and 5-door models, Ford only allowed the lower volume 3-door as a starting point for the Navajo. Not allowing Mazda to sell the 5-door Navajo was clearly Ford's way of preventing too many of its profitable Explorer sales from being awarded to Mazda. With just a new front fascia and tail lamps, and Ford badging swapped to Mazda inside, the Navajo offered little incentive over the Explorer other than some cheaper plastic trim. The Explorer sales took off in its early years, but Mazda couldn't break through on the marketing of the Navajo, despite earning Motor Trend's Truck of the Year for 1991. Having never sold SUVs before, Mazda could only build off their reputation of the B-Series pickup to encourage customers to try their SUV over the Explorer. But when the Firestone tire scandal hit, Mazda was hurt by it as well, since of course the Navajo used the same tires. When the Explorer was redesigned for 1995, Mazda dropped the Navajo and wouldn't offer another SUV until 2001, with the Tribute, yet another rebadge, this time of the smaller Ford Escape.
But what's this SUV doing in with all these sports cars?
Number 8. Toyota Hilux, Volkswagen Taro. My fellow US viewers may not be familiar with either of these models, as neither were sold here. Well, technically, the name Hilux was used for a short time after it was first sold here in 1971. But soon after, Toyota decided to drop the Hilux name in favor of just calling it the Toyota truck, kind of like when they sold the unnamed Toyota van here in the 1980s.
It may be a job for Toyota Wonder Wagon.
Although the Hilux was designed to be sold worldwide, it didn't sell well in Europe when badged as a Toyota. Coincidentally, Volkswagen wanted a 1-ton pickup to add to their lineup in Europe, so VW partnered with Toyota in 1989 to build the Hilux in their Hanover plant in Germany to sell in Europe, but with VW badging. The name Taro presumably came from Toyota as well, as the name is a Japanese suffix to denote the firstborn son of a family. Although the trucks had a 1-ton rating, they weren't exactly fast, as their 2.4-liter diesel engines could only make 82 horsepower. Initially, the only option was rear-wheel drive and a regular cab, but by 1994, with sales sagging, they opted to offer a 4-wheel drive version, as well as an extended cab. However, that one was an import and built in Japan, not at the Hanover plant. Despite the additional options, sales never met the expectations of either Volkswagen or Toyota, and the Taro, as well as a partnership between the two companies, ended in 1997. Number 7.
Just look how pumped car dealership tube man is.
Mazda 2 Scion IA.
And his significant tube other.
A while back I did an entire episode about Scion, a brand created by Toyota in 2003 for the US that was marketed towards younger drivers, hoping to attract buyers who thought Toyota cars were just for old people. Launched initially with just 2 models, the XA and XB, the brand struggled in its later years as a majority of their buyers were not exactly young, since their target young audience simply couldn't afford them. Although performance-minded buyers were impressed with the FRS Sports Coupe, their more fuel-efficient and affordable options were losing sales by the mid-2010s. In a last-ditch effort to introduce new competitive models, in 2015, Toyota turned to rival Mazda for a car that Mazda themselves stopped selling in the US the year before because, ironically, it didn't sell all that well. The Mazda model was called the 2, imported from Japan, and the Scion version followed its usual 2-character naming convention and called it the IA. The new IA was a tough sell, considering the only vehicles that sold well in the US back then, and still now, are trucks and SUVs, neither of which Scion offered.
And he can barely contain his excitement about the low-speed pre-collision safety system.
The IA was the only Scion model that wasn't based on a Toyota design. It also was one of the shortest model runs for Scion, tied with the Corolla-based IM by lasting only 1 year, as Toyota finally decided to kill the Scion brand in August of 2016. When considered as a Scion only, the Mazda-based IA was definitely a flop, as it only lasted 1 model year. However, it got a few more sales starting in 2017, when Toyota simply rebadged the IA to be the Toyota Yaris IA, and by 2019 dropped the IA and just called it the Yaris.
It's the Yaris IA sedan, now simply the Yaris sedan.
With sales dwindling each year, Toyota discontinued the Yaris in the North American market in 2020, although as the writing of this episode, the Mazda 2 remains in production in other world markets. Number 6. Dodge Raider and Dakota, Mitsubishi Montero and Raider. So yes, you heard the name Raider twice in that intro. This one is a bit odd in that the same model name was used as 2 different rebadges, but in opposite directions. Chrysler and Mitsubishi had a long-standing partnership that began as far back as 1970. However, it wasn't until the 1980s that their sharing of engines and entire models became more popular. In 1986, Chrysler wanted an entry in the compact SUV market without the cost of developing one from scratch. Mitsubishi was already selling their Montero SUV in the US, better known as the Pajero in other countries. With little to no dealer network, Mitsubishi models were often sold within Dodge or Chrysler dealerships. Mitsubishi offered the Montero to be sold as a Dodge Raider.
Pound for pound, the best standard-equipped import 4x4 on or off the road.
But since they shared dealerships, the 2 SUVs would sometimes end up on the same sales floor, with little visual differences. Although they sold nearly 20,000 for the 1987 model year, sales were less than half the next couple years, leading to Dodge dropping the Raider by 1989.
Dodge import trucks. We're going places.
Despite that last failure, Mitsubishi and Dodge would pair up again several years later, in 2005, when Mitsubishi wanted to fill their long-running gap in the pickup market, since their Mighty Max was discontinued in 1996. This time around, Dodge would be supplying the donor car, the 3rd generation Dakota. This would be the last generation for Dodge's midsize pickup, and was not nearly the success it was during its 2nd gen, no thanks to more squared-off styling that turned off potential buyers. Mitsubishi decided to reuse the Raider name that Dodge had used in the late 80s, and made an effort to give the new Raider its own unique sheet metal. Inside, it was all Dakota, including its optional V8 engine, making it the only Mitsubishi to ever offer a V8. Sadly, the Mitsubishi Raider didn't improve on the Dakota's looks much at all, and maxed out at just under 7,500 sold in 2007. With only 1,100 sold in 2009, and Dakota sales also dropping to their lowest levels. Mitsubishi discontinued the Raider that year, and the Dakota itself would be gone 2 years later. Number 5. Lotus Elan, Kia Elan.
You think it's the Lotus Elan. In fact, it's the Kia Elan.
This is one of 2 entries in this list where they didn't even bother to change the model name. For this one, neither of these cars were big sellers. In fact, the rebadge version only started after the original donor's car production ended. It also didn't help that, at the time, the brand doing the rebadging was definitely not known for little sports cars, which probably hurt its credibility. British automaker Lotus first offered the 2-seater convertible Elan from 1962 through 1975, which was a more traditional roadster design being front-engine and rear-wheel drive. However, by the 1980s, Lotus was struggling to stay afloat.
Can you swim?
It was purchased by General Motors in 1986. GM wanted to bring back the Elan for a new roadster and help finance the design of what would be codenamed the M100. GM's association with Isuzu at the time resulted in the new Elan being powered by an Isuzu engine, but was heavily modified to produce 162 horsepower, which was a lot for a car that weighed less than 2,200 pounds. However, its release in 1989 meant stiff competition with the then new Mazda Miata, and Lotus only managed to sell 3,855 Elans from 1989 to 1992, of which only 559 were sold in the US. A few more were sold in 1994 and 95 in the UK, to use up the remaining engine supply. Presumably as a way to earn some extra cash, Lotus sold the Elan name to Korean automaker Kia in 1995, and Kia built their own version in South Korea. Other than providing new tail lamps, since the Lotus Elan used tail lamps from the Renault Alpine GTA, sourcing an engine from Mazda instead of Isuzu, and a few Kia-specific interior parts, the rest of the Kia Elan was identical to the one Lotus once sold. Sold only in Korea and Japan, the Kia Elan never made it to the US. Kia in the 1990s was best known for mainstream and not so exciting compact cars, and even in its home country, the Elan wasn't taken seriously.
Little things like the radio, it's possibly the worst radio in the history of car radio.
Only 1,056 Kia Elans were ever made, making it not only one of the rarest Kias, but probably the last car anyone would ever guess was a Kia.
Whoever made it should be shot.
Number 4. Nissan Frontier, Suzuki Equator. Although Suzuki had offered small pickups in the past, they were best known in the US for their tiny subcompacts such as the Geo Metro, as well as SUVs like the infamous Samurai, and more mainstream offerings like the Grand Vitara. By 2007, Suzuki had their best sales year ever in the US, but didn't offer a pickup. To help get one on the market quickly, Suzuki turned to Nissan in 2008 to offer their own version of the mid-size Frontier pickup, which was better known as the Navara outside of North America. Nissan had been selling the second-generation Frontier since 2004, so the new Suzuki version, to be called the Equator, would begin as a new model on a platform that was already 5 years old, although it coincided with the Frontier's mid-cycle refresh. Despite the record sales in 2007, Suzuki's overall sales took a nosedive over the next couple years, and as a result, advertising was cut back. So much so that pretty much no one knew the Equator even existed. Other than a Suzuki-specific front grille, the Equator shared most everything else from the Frontier. The base price of the Equator in 2009 was under $18,000, which was about the same price for the Frontier, making little incentive on choosing the Equator. Suzuki was only able to sell about 200 a month, and by 2010, rumors started circulating that Suzuki was considering leaving the US and Canadian market. Suzuki finally pulled out in 2012, resulting in the Equator being canceled after only around 5,800 were sold.
Whenever I see that big Suzuki badge on the front of what looks like a Nissan, I get excited, I get ecstatic, and I should probably go to therapy over it because I don't think that's a normal reaction to an 11-year-old outdated pickup truck.
Number 3. Saab 9-3 Cadillac BLS. For my fellow viewers in the US and Canada, this next rebadge may not look familiar, as it was never sold here. In fact, the BLS was the only Cadillac that was never sold in North America. Although it was based on the Saab 9-3 and built in Sweden, this one may have some of you arguing that isn't a true rebadge, as the exterior and interior designs were specific to each model. But I consider it to be a rebadge, as the Cadillac BLS only existed because of the Saab 9-3. The early 2000s was a revolutionary period for Cadillac, with a daring new angular body style that started with the 2002 CTS. That car's success led GM to quickly start revising the entire Cadillac lineup, to share the same styling. To further expand on the new design language to Europe, then GM Vice Chairman Bob Lutz suggested using the Saab 9-3 as a starting point, which itself had several GM parts as part of their recent takeover of Saab. The CTS was also the start of new 3-letter designations for most every Cadillac. Internal to GM and not advertised as such, the 3-letter combinations were really acronyms. For example, CTS meant Catera Touring Sedan, as it was a replacement for the poor-selling Catera. Although GM considered the BLS to mean B-segment luxury sedan, as it was smaller than the CTS, many in GM instead would say BLS stood for Bob Lutz Special, considering how the BLS was a marketing and sales failure. From its launch in 2006 to its end in 2008, only 7,356 units of the BLS were sold. Although Lutz may have considered the Swedish heritage and build quality to be an advantage, the typical European clearly didn't want to drive a Saab with a Cadillac badge. Number 2. Chevy Colorado, GMC Canyon, Isuzu I-Series. The old Chevy S10 pickup is arguably the best-known compact pickup ever built by GM.
You know, if it doesn't fit in my Chevy S10, it doesn't fit in my life.
Wow, moron. Good for Happy Gilmore. Oh, my God!
Prior to the S10 days, GM partnered with Isuzu to sell their Love pickup, but then switched sides by selling the GM-designed Chevy S10 and GMC S15 Sonoma pickups, and allowed Isuzu to make a rebadge version called the Ombre.
Somebody help me up.
Upon their end in 2004, GM replaced them with the Chevy Colorado and GMC Canyon, but this time, this new GMT 355 platform was a joint development effort between GM and Isuzu. So as a result, Isuzu would get their own version of the GMT 355, called the I-Series, as each truck would have a specific number based on the engine displacement, such as the I-350 for the 3.5-liter 5-cylinder. Unlike the Chevy S10, the equivalent Isuzu offering, the Ombre, had been out of production for 4 years before the I-Series launched in 2005. Isuzu's product offering in the US was collapsing by that point, nearly avoiding bankruptcy in 2002. Prior to the I-Series, the only other car Isuzu offered was the Ascender SUV, which I included in my first Rebadge Flops video, as it shared a platform with 5 other GM models.
But wait, there's more!
The addition of the I-Series marked Isuzu's last-ditch effort to stay relevant in the US, but sales for the I-Series peaked at only 4,100 for 2007. Isuzu's announcement in January of 2008 to pull from the US market 1 year later for light truck sales resulted in a shortened 2009 model year as the last for the I-Series. But it wasn't the end of Isuzu, as they still sell heavy-duty commercial trucks to this day. Number 1. Chevy Cavalier, Toyota Cavalier. I noted earlier that there would be 2 entries in this list, where the rebadge kept the same model name. Like the Elan, in which Kia was hoping to take advantage of a former Lotus name, Toyota apparently thought that the popular Chevrolet model name, the Cavalier, would make it popular in Japan. If that's true, they thought wrong. I chose this one as my number 1 pick not so much because of low sales, but because of how weird it was for a Japanese automaker to think that an American-made car would sell well in Japan. The Chevy Cavalier first launched in 1982, but it wasn't until its 3rd generation that began in 1995 did the idea to sell the Cavalier in Japan came to be. From the outside, the Toyota Cavalier looked nearly identical to the Chevy, but inside, the dashboard was converted to right-hand drive. They even tried to make seating adjustments for the fact that Japanese people were typically shorter and slimmer than most Americans. Although this was 20 years ago, I'm sure the same holds true today, probably even more so, and I'm saying that as an American.
Woohoo! Look at that blubber fly!
But the one thing Toyota couldn't easily change was that the Cavalier's overall size and engine displacement classified it as what Japan considered a normal class car, not a compact, and as a result, the Cavalier incurred more taxes than smaller Japanese-built cars. It also didn't help that, big surprise, Japanese car buyers considered the American-built car to be lacking in quality. Even with upgrades Toyota insisted be done for their Cavalier, as compared to those sold stateside. GM and Toyota had hoped this partnership would sell 20,000 Cavaliers a year in Japan, through 1,100 Toyota dealers. But in its first full year of the experiment of 1996, sales peaked at just 11,467, and never went up from there. It didn't help that many Cavaliers that were bound for Japan were sent back for not meeting their standards, despite these cars getting extra attention that the American-sold cars didn't get in the same factory. GM finally canceled the deal in 2000, but the 3rd-gen Cavalier would live on in the US until 2005.
Toyota Cavalier, this is a sick joke.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 70s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today, and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.
That's not indicative, by the way, of the speed of this car. We've just been overtaken by a scaffolder's van. But I can assure you that we could beat the bastard if we wanted to, but at the moment we don't want to because we're talking about this nice little car.